Hello again, everyone. Scoons Comics here with another exciting, thrilling comic book haul! Or as the theme has been here lately, not so much. So, I've been thinking about this topic for a while now. I've got my 200 plus subscriber contest going through May 20th, where I talk about showing off the 1 to 3 comics that made you addicted to comic books, that got you into this hobby and you can't get out no matter how hard you try. And I was thinking about it, and I showed my 3 books that were mine. But it was more than those that really got me into this hobby. It was also Wizard Magazine. Oh my gosh. Some of you are cheering. Some of you are turning this off instantly. But when I was a kid, Death of Superman hit the shelves, and I was intrigued. And then I remember being at my local mall with my mother and going through Reader's World Bookstore, and I saw this, and for some reason they also had issue 19. So I recognized Wolverine. I knew Wolverine enough. I'm enough a nerd that I was like, that's Wolverine. That's one of the X-Men. I remember him from Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends. He had an Australian accent. It's weird. He's Canadian. And then I saw this one with evil Spider-Man at the time. I did not know who Venom was, but I was like, okay, what is this magazine? Wizard? Wizard, the Guide to Comics? So I harassed my mother. So I was 14. I harassed my poor mother, and she relented and bought both of these fine magazines for me. And I poured through them. This was a gateway. This is pre-internet, people. Like, unless I wanted to sit and chat with the people at the comic book shop, which I did not at 14, it was all over my head. But this told me many things. This gave me a price guide. This told me about other publishers. This gave me the news from around the comic book industry. What's happening this month? Which books are coming out? They had a whole section in here called Good and Cheap, which was just good, cheap reads you could find at your local comic book shop. This gave me the top 10 writers and artists. Wizard was amazing. It gets a lot of flack. And rightly so. It's very much tied to the 90s boom period of comic books. Okay. Juvenile magazine, a lot of bathroom humor. Okay. Also, they always had their monthly top 10 comics this month. And this was, every comic shop I went into as a teenager, these books were on the wall at the comic shop, and they were instantly then charged double the value or triple the value or whatever, some insane amount of money, because Wizard said this is a hot book. And there were usually Valiant books, which some people thought Wizard was tied to. Whatever. Now that's like, there's many people that will tell you the demerits of Wizard magazine. I'm not going to do that. I loved this magazine. It's no longer being published. I miss it very much. Because frankly, I miss comic book news a lot. If I don't stay on top of the internet at all times, I miss things. I miss books that are coming out. I miss artists and writers that are switching books. I miss these things. But every month, the vast majority of that information was in Wizard Magazine. Loved this. So I got these first 2 issues. Again, 18, 19, I was off and running. Then right after that, we had so I'm not going to go show you, like, I have the vast majority of all the Wizard magazines because I'm cool like that. I don't have them all, which bothers me because I'm a collector of things. Not to have all the things bothers me, but that's neither here nor there. I knew I was going to talk about this, so I dug out my 3 giant tubs from the closet of the comic book room that has all my Wizard magazines, and I went through them looking for the ones that stuck out. I knew several that I wanted to show here, and that's what I'm going to do. I'm just going to show you some of them that meant something to me, that are worth checking out, that just nostalgic fun, and what we're missing in the industry anymore, man. We need this magazine back, or something similar. So right around the same time, they did a Wizard Magazine tribute Death of Superman issue. This has a $7 price tag. I have no idea. I'm sure I did not pay $7. This is my second copy of this. My original copy I beat up. I dog-eared. I read it to death. The cover fell off. It died. So I'm pretty sure I found this in a quarter bin. I would never have paid $7. Had to have been in a quarter bin. But anyway, so this is right when I'm collecting comic books. Not only does this issue talk about the death of Superman and those comics, but it talks about the entire history of Superman. A character that I didn't know much about except for like the Super Friends cartoon and the occasional black and white George Reeves TV show I'd see on Nickelodeon. Fascinating. Gave like the top comics, best Superman stories of all time are talked about in here, which gave me something to look for. The history of artists on this book, just fascinating stuff. The history of Superman in cinema, things I had no idea about. Just information. Just when you're starting this hobby, you're just craving information. You just want to know all the things. And when you couldn't just Wikipedia these things, this was lifeblood. Amazing. Then, and I never hear this magazine talked about much, this particular issue. For good or bad, yay or nay. The 100 Most Collectible Comics, Wizard. I remember picking this up, so when I started buying comics, it was at the local baseball card and comic book shop. They didn't carry the Wizard magazine for whatever reason. I don't know why. They didn't. So I started finally getting my parents to drive me to the other comic book shop in town, which was less convenient. Bless you, people. And they carried Wizard. And this was like one of the first. I remember seeing this on the shelf and like, oh, I need this. 100 Most Collectible Comics, yes. And it's like through the entire history of comics, like all these amazing books. So this is my real history lesson to comics. But also Wizard would promote like weird stuff. Like I think it's this issue. Bear with me again as I read on camera. So this talks about grading for the first time. I learned about grading comic books and how interesting that was. Okay. So restoring comic books is bad. Like you don't want to restore like a really key, important comic book because that will lower the value. But in the 90s, there's a whole article here about how best to do it. And they show like a bad, chewed-up copy of Amazing Fantasy, probably a very good copy. And then the restored copy where it's all pretty. And no, don't do that. You can get a comic book cleaned. You can get it pressed to try to get some wrinkles and things out of it. Oh, this restoring. Oh, bad business. I'd kind of forgotten that article, and then I was flipping through this. Interesting. Just interesting historically to see this. If you find this at your local comic shop, I find these Wizard magazines all the time in the 25-cent bin, the cheap bins. Pick them up for nostalgia's sake. There's some good information in here. There's some good articles. Then we had Wizard 24. I remember this being a big deal because Batman, there was a brand new Batman, had a brand new costume, and Wizard was going to debut it on this cover. And then apparently DC Comics said, whoa, we want it to debut in Batman issue 500. So they darkened everything, right? Okay, that's all well and good. Well, you open up the comic, the magazine, literally 3 pages later. Oh, where is it? Am I wrong? Am I lying? No. Okay, excuse me. Like 13 pages later, we have an ad for Advance Comics magazine, which features the whole costume. Right there's the whole darn thing. Very strange. So I remember this being very controversial at the time, and I was very into the Nightfall Batman story that this was featured in, so this was very important to me. And then I remember I got a subscription to Wizard shortly thereafter, and I remember I was homesick from school. I was the only one home, middle school, like 7th grade. And my first issue of the subscription came that day, and it was glorious. This magazine is still important to me to this day for just pure nostalgia. Wizard, number 27. Jim Lee cover, Wildcats. Property that never really caught on. But there's an interview in here with Alan Moore. That was my introduction to Alan Moore and all things Watchmen and the more serious side of comics. Dan Jurgens of my Death of Superman fame. I love this. I've read this religiously for years. I'd thumb through this at least once or twice a year. Love this magazine. This is a longer video. It's already approaching 10 minutes and I'm still rambling on about Wizard. But Who else is going to do it? Who else is going to talk about Wizard, if not me? And it was just your source for news, for all things. I've talked about the artist Stephen Platt. A couple videos in here now. I bought those issues of Prophet. Very 90s guy, all muscles, all guns, blazing, very unrealistic, but it had a certain something. He was the hot artist for the time. So I remember very distinctly picking up Wizard 30. I'm not a Beavis and Butthead fan, really, but I remember this issue because the big news story, and if I was more professional, I would have marked these pages before I did this, so you just wouldn't have to look at my mug while I flip through pages. Wizard News! Platt goes to Image! And there's this fine artwork being shown there. But I remember reading this in the car and going, what? It's important business. Oh, good stuff. I miss it. And then an issue later, we showcased Mr. Platt's artwork on the cover. Look at that. Guns blazing. Cigars being chomped down here. Ponytails. Weird headgear. It's awesome. And then this extends out. I won't show the whole thing, but it extends out into this huge poster in the middle of the magazine, which, yes, my 14-year-old self did have laminated by my father, the school teacher, and was on my wall for several years. Why? Because it looked cool. It's great. It's great. Was also great for, again, just history of comics. When you didn't have the internet to show you all the past things, and if your library didn't have one of the few books about comic book history, Wizard was where I went to a lot of times. So we had issue 36, I remember being a big deal. First of all, we had 0 Hour, DC Comics' big summer crossover that I was really into that year. But then it had the death of Jack Kirby, who I did not know who that was. I now know. Integral character figure in the history of comic books. But there's an article in here about Jack Kirby. And yeah, this was my introduction. Wow. Yeah, thinking about it, this was the first time I really saw his name. And it's amazing. Amazing, amazing, amazing. Then a couple years later, I went off to college, and I did not have a subscription to Wizard at that time. I don't know why, but I didn't. So I remember being at college, and I didn't have a comic shop there either. So I was suddenly like someone who used to buy comics every week. I had nothing. Got nothing going on. Internet around a little more so I could follow online some things, but I missed the comfort of my Wizard magazine. And a few months later, the local convenience store down on college, just off campus, in walking distance where I lived, I saw on the shelves Wizard number 88, and I said, yes! Yes, thank you, God, yes. So that was exciting. And then, toward the end of its run, Wizard changed its format. See, these are all like these square-bound, like hard, I don't know, they don't look like a magazine, they look more like a catalog, right? Well, then they shifted to more looking like a Rolling Stone style, and they featured movies way more. Talking about Iron Man 2 and the 50 best comic book movies of all time. Whew. Yeah, so, I mean, I still was into it. It still had good articles for somewhat, but it was trying to reach out of just the comic book collecting niche. And unfortunately that failed because in 2011, Ryan Reynolds and Green Lantern spelled the last hurrah for Wizard magazine, and the comic book went out of business. Or the magazine went out of business. Which annoyed my ex-wife greatly, and myself, but she had just bought me a subscription to Wizard magazine shortly before this, and then they canceled it, and she, very rightly so, was like, well, what happens to my money? Apparently nothing. Wizard has it. Sorry, it's gone. And that was Wizard magazine. It ran for, I should have looked, but I didn't. It ran for, how many? 235 issues, not counting all the specials. So probably around 250 issues of Wizard were made. It's fun. Just, if you see it in the quarter bin, I wouldn't pay more than $1 or so for a Wizard magazine, unless it was very nostalgic for you. But they're fun. They're a nice look back into the history of the medium in the 90s and into the mid-2000s, 2011. It's a nice little window. There's usually great interviews in there. The price guides will make you laugh because stuff is way cheaper in there than it is now. It's just interesting, and I highly recommend digging some out if you still have some. And that's all I got this week, people. I will be back next week with something fun and exciting to show you. Until then, please, my subscription contest goes through May 20th. And hit that like button, subscribe, comment. Let me know what you think. I'll talk to you all soon.